Welcome to Penn State Dickinson Law's Profiles and Leadership Series. My name is Daryl Lim. I serve as the H. Leddy Montauk Junior Chair and Associate Dean for Research and Innovation at the Law School. This series offers an unparalleled opportunity to glean insights from top leaders who serve in government, education, the private sector, and civil society. In each episode, we invite our leaders to reflect on their journeys and share skills, core values, and qualities that make them the leaders they are today. We're very pleased to have Susan Jin Davis. She serves as Social Impact Officer for Roker Entertainment and is a leading producer of TV digital branded programming and entertainment. She's also an advisor for ALO Advisors, a firm specializing in areas of sustainability, diversity, and corporate social responsibility. Susan serves as on-call faculty for the Center for Creative Learning in the areas of organizational leadership, women's leadership, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She also serves as adjunct faculty for the Betsy Magnus Leadership Institute, Betsy Magnus Graduate Institute, and the Rising Leaders Program of Women in Cable Telecommunications. She is also serving as the systems designer for the Antiracist Development Institute of Penn State Dickinson Law, established to dismantle structures that scaffold systemic racial inequality using a systems design approach for the purpose of achieving systemic equity and offering organizations across the country systems design-based approaches to implementing anti-racist practices, processes, and policies throughout each of their functions. She was senior executive at Comcast Corporation, Comcast NBC. She was its first chief sustainability officer, where she created the framework for the company's environmental, social, and governance disclosures. She created Comcast NBC Universal's zero waste strategy and co-led its future fleet strategy, transforming the company's fleet to low-carbon vehicles. She negotiated a historic memorandum of understanding between Comcast and the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander national community as part of the company's acquisition of NBC Universal. This created diversity commitments in the areas of programming, supply and employment, and community investment. She was responsible for the creation of Comcast Cine Asian America, the first ever video-on-demand offering of Asian and Asian American television and movie content on the Comcast network. She has been named one of the most powerful women in cable by Cable FAX magazine and one of the top 50 most influential minorities in cable by Cable World for many years. Welcome, Susan.
Thanks, Daryl, and thanks for your generous introduction, because we've now run out of time, and it's been really great talking to everybody, and I hope everybody has a great weekend.
We're thrilled to have you. Just give us a sense of your professional journey, some reflections, if you might, and share with us some highs and lows.
Sure, I'd be glad to. And it's just such a pleasure and an honor to be able to talk with you today. I talk to my daughter often. She's 22 years old. And, as you went through my bio, she actually said to me, you quit a corporate job a couple years ago, and now you have 5 jobs. And, I'll start with kind of where I am today, which is in some ways I do have 5 jobs. In some ways I have 1 job, which is really around how to activate diversity, equity, and inclusion in all the environments in which I find myself. So that's what I'm doing today after a long history of doing that kind of work all along the way as a side gig. Now I could do it as a main gig. But, I think my professional career really, really started at the beginning. And that is the fact that I'm a child of immigrants. And everything that I've ever done, every skill, every talent that I've ever shown to the world, it comes from that heritage. So early on, as a child of immigrants, I was put in a situation where I had to communicate, I had to problem solve, I had to bridge people and make connections with people. I had to find ways around barriers and walls. And all of those skills have served me well in my, multi-decade career in corporate America. So, I started out in the government doing work kind of in the consumer protection area that then connected me to corporations that I had been actually investigating, where I was able to do work in Washington, D.C., policy and advocacy before the administration and Capitol Hill and agencies of jurisdiction, which ended up allowing me to work for a Silicon Valley startup and to start their DC office because I had worked for a big company's Washington, DC office. So I was able to take that skill and create that kind of function for a smaller startup. I then ended up becoming the head of investor relations at that Silicon Valley tech company because advocacy is advocacy. So whether you're doing policy advocacy or you're doing advocacy to investors and to analysts around the value proposition of your company, the same skill set was required. And being an advocate for my family and for my community since I was a child, those kinds of skills really served me well. And from there, because my network sort of grew organically and not purposefully, and one of the things I often say to young people is, purposely create your networks because they end up being important connections for you personally and professionally, as they have for me. I just did it kind of accidentally. So my network allowed me to be in contact with folks at Comcast, and they approached me and asked if I would do some very unique jobs within the company, new business opportunities that they were hoping to grow. And I ended up spending about 15 years of my career there in a variety of responsibilities, anything from operationalizing compliance for this very diverse set of companies under the Comcast Corporation umbrella, to, as you mentioned, starting the first Office of Sustainability and creating that first sort of foray into the ESG space. And so my career was really around the fact that I was able to use the skills that I'd always used since I was a child, unbeknownst to me, right? This is all retrospective, right? It's not like I was clever enough to think, I learned how to communicate really well because I had to help my parents navigate America and English. And I used that purposefully to help me professionally, right? I look back now and say, you know what? Those kinds of skills honed at an early age served me well, right? So I think that's one main thing that was a theme in my career. And the second one is that you don't do it alone, that there are people along the way that mentor you, that advocate for you, that sponsor you and elevate you and promote you and give you exposure. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is, just like I mentioned, is having those connections and network, because they also provide a supportive environment for you as you are growing your career, but they're also practical connections for the next great thing you may want to do. And the world is really small. So I think that my themes are those things, and my career has been diverse, and I've been very fortunate, and I've had a lot of help along the way, and I've made a ton of mistakes along the way. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
That's a great overview. Now, let's just pick up from the last thing you said, your mistakes. Learning from mistakes, just going through those mistakes and coming out stronger, I suppose, is a big theme that I've heard from every leader, but every leader's stories about their mistakes are different. So tell us about your approach towards mistakes, and if you would share one that was memorable to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think through mistakes is where you learn and grow. So sometimes people are afraid to take a step, to raise their hand, to do something out of their comfort zone because they're afraid to make mistakes. And that's a mistake, because all of the missteps that I've taken have allowed me to grow and to learn and, to be honest, to open the door to new opportunities. I think early in my career, when you come from a family that did not have any connections here, did not have a network here, I didn't have mentors that looked like me. I didn't have anyone sit down with me and say, you're embarking on this legal career. You're embarking on this corporate career. Let me tell you what worked for me. I didn't have that. So I just sort of threw myself into my career in the way that I knew how to do so, which was to be emphatic, to be direct, to be assertive and aggressive. Because when you're a child of immigrants, you have to fight for everything,
All
right?
very un-Asian things.
They are un-Asian, and yet they are very immigrant, right? They're very much about like the scrappiness that's necessary to survive in a country that isn't yours, or in a country that doesn't accept you. And I'm not an immigrant, but I'm a child of one, of two. And so I saw that there was all of these spaces of exclusion that I had to help my parents and my community get through. And so knowing that, I would kind of like lumber through and bust through doors. And that was one learning. And I had mentors that said, you know what, Susan, you got to have more than one speed. You can't always, you have to know the audience. You can't always just bust through doors, break through doors, jump over walls. Sometimes that's necessary, but sometimes there's other ways. And build community around you and partners around you that will help you through the projects and the assignments and the goals that you're trying to achieve, instead of thinking you're like a solo artist, right? So that was a learning and a mistake that I made, but I had mentors and sponsors who advised me, that said, took time out to have those conversations with me when I did break through a door a little too aggressively, when I was too direct, or I didn't have the right approach. I didn't know my audience, right? And so that's an example of a mistake that I made many times early on. But luckily I had people that told me that I needed to have different approaches to different situations, and to acclimate myself, right? To slow down. So that was a really big learning for me early on. And by the way, like people often say to me, you're less aggressive now. You're less,
We
like
just didn't meet you like 20 years ago.
yeah, they're kind of like, exactly. But yes, there is numerous forms that I shapeshift into, and I think that's how I've learned to work better with others and to be more effective, quite frankly.
Thanks for sharing that. So you're with Al Roker.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So Al Roker, who is one of the anchors of the Today Show on NBC, he is somebody that I worked with when I was chief sustainability officer, and he was the talent that we used to be able to tell stories around what Comcast Corporation was doing to save the environment. So when I left Comcast, he approached me and said, I have a production company. I would love you to come on board because we're trying to create a new line of business around social impact storytelling. And what that was is when we work with a brand, for example, Comcast, and this actually happened, and the brand is doing a lot of great things in the world, but like a tree that falls when nobody sees it, if you don't actually talk about it, when you don't amplify on it, it's as if sometimes it didn't happen. So our goal at Roker Entertainment, and my job as social impact officer, is to find those opportunities for brands to talk about the good things they're doing. And it's not just about marketing that company, not to say that the company doesn't get any positivity out of those stories that we tell, but I think more importantly, it's around creating a movement of social impact action by others. If you watch a documentary, if you watch a TV series or a short that talks about good things that are happening in the world, it teaches you about the problem, it teaches you about the solution, but it also kind of hits you personally, and makes you want to do something about what you just saw and heard, right? And that's what I think is the most exciting thing about what I'm doing now, is the opportunity, and it sounds corny, to change the world, to be able to shift minds, to be able to create narratives, to do narrative changing work, and to ultimately do social impact work together as a community. So it's really about that movement that I'm really intrigued and excited about. How do you create a movement around the biggest problems in the world and how we can together solve them? So that's what we do at Al Roker Entertainment. And it is such a thrill and so exciting to be able to be part of that.
And there are many problems in the world. How do you pick ESG as something that's, and particularly it sounds like the E part is a big part of your focus. How do you pick your areas of priority?
Do you mean personally or professionally or both?
Both.
Well, I mean, I think it kind of picked me, right? I mean, my lived experience was very much embedded in the sustainability definition, big S. So when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, it's not just about climate change. It's not just about environmental responsibility. It's about hunger. It's about poverty. It's about, equity, gender equity. It's about all of the biggest challenges that the world is faced with. How do we make the world more sustainable for everyone and everything? So when you look at it that way, I would say that was my lived experience. That is what I observed growing up, you know, in an immigrant community. And so it was always what I picked because it picked me. And then throughout my career, what I found myself doing is I was gravitating towards those areas of social impact and doing it kind of like as a side thing, right? So I had a job to do and I figured out ways in which I could do social impact work as part of my job or in addition to my job, community volunteering, just doing that kind of work that the company was dedicated to. And what I realized is that's actually my life's work. That's actually my mission. And what ended up happening is I began to purposefully create those opportunities for me. So the sustainability job, for example, is something that I pitched to an executive at the company. I said, this is not something that we do formally. This is something that I know about. This is something I want to do. This is something that companies ought to be doing. And this was at the time when ESG was becoming of interest to investors and shareholders and the public, and companies were beginning to do more serious work in this area. So I decided at that point in my career, after doing that kind of work on the side, to make it my full-time job. And it became something that was probably one of my most fulfilling jobs in corporate America. So it found me, it was part of my lived experience, and it became something that I purposely decided to do from a professional perspective once I was able to do that, right? I mean, I had to get to a level in my career to be able to ask for those kinds of jobs. And that's the way I did it. There's other ways to do it, but that's how I got into ESG, how I picked it, how I prioritized it.
Thanks. So on your LinkedIn page, you have a wallpaper that says, I am for equity because, and then a dash, and it says, equity starts with everyone. What does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, there's the distinction between equality and equity that I always like to start the answer with. And that is, sometimes there's situations where we should treat everybody the same. I happen to believe that everybody should have a roof over their head, a good roof over their head, and have good food and healthcare, right? Everybody. But then there's also the concept of equity, which is you have to meet people where they are. And at a time when there's such an indictment on diversity efforts because of the Supreme Court decision that was in the academic realm, there's just been such an attack on diversity efforts by everyone else in order to create equity because everybody is not equally situated. And therefore, I need, as an individual, need to meet them where they are and to accommodate where they are, as opposed to treating them the exact same way as I treat everyone else. And the world needs to create policies and programs that address inequities, that address situations that are unfair and unjust. And so for me, it is a personal mission for me to find places where I see unfairness and the lack of justice. And in my personal life, that was around being the voice of my community and my family and, be able to really right wrongs, and then professionally to find ways in which we can create a level playing field for others. And the best example that I can think of on that front is when we were hiring interns at Comcast, I challenged my team, like, how do we make sure that we get a diversified slate of interns to interview for jobs? Because we weren't getting a diverse slate. And the team came up with a way to reach all different types of students. I mean, and one way to do that was to look at a wider group of colleges, universities, and even community colleges, right? And from there, begin to make decisions based on creating equity. And so we had a number of interns who were from underrepresented groups. And as they put it, one of my interns said, I'm a low-income kid from Philly. And creating an opportunity that they would never have if we weren't focused and purposeful about creating an opportunity and addressing inequity. Because there's no way he would have been chosen because he didn't have a parent that was in corporate America. He didn't know anybody at Comcast. His parents were not college educated, didn't finish, one parent didn't finish elementary school. So, and lived in poverty. So how do we create situations of equity is about what you do personally every day and what you do in your power, in your job, in your professional affiliations to be able to bridge those gaps. I believe it's a corporate and an individual mission that we should undertake. So that's why I put that out there, because equity is so important.
Thank you. So I get news feeds, and the last few months I'm getting a number of these feeds that talk about DEI programs at companies being rolled back, company after company, and even law
Yeah.
firms, and lawsuits against companies or law firms for their DEI programs. Uh, Tell us a bit from where you stand, what you see is happening, and have we gone too far too quickly?
I don't think we've gone far enough, so it can't be that. I think that the fear is about diversity efforts, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts. The fear is that they are about excluding the majority and including only the minority. So there's a zero-sum mentality, I think, that is at play here when people hear about diversity programs. So if you follow that fear, you understand why people would say, you know what, that's not fair to create a different kind of exclusion. And that's a misunderstanding about the work. What the work is about is widening the net and including more people. And the way I like to talk about it is if you look at a pie chart, half of the country is comprised of women and half men. And this is oversimplified. So half women, half men. So if we just look at that, do we think it is equitable that most of the leaders that we find at the top of companies, at the top of organizations, including academia, even nonprofits, do you think it's fair that the majority are men? And the answer would be, of course, that's not fair. Why is it there's 50% women and 50% men, and there's so few women that make it up to the C-suite of corporations? And I think the number is something like 24%, 25%. Nobody would think that's fair on its face because it doesn't make any sense that is what we're faced with. So inclusion is around making sure that you use all of the talent at your workplace, that everybody who's talented has an opportunity, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, and so forth. Everybody has an equal chance and an equitable chance to get ahead. When you think of it that way, it's not about like, you're going to lose out now because you're majority and you're men, and all the women are going to have all the benefits. That's a zero-sum game. My attitude is, how do you talk about inclusive leadership? How do you make sure that your organizations are getting the best out of everybody, not some people? How are you making sure that there's environments where people feel comfortable enough to bring their best selves to work, which therefore allows them to be innovative and creative and come up with the best ideas and to think about things in a different way? That's diversity. That's around inclusive leadership. That includes everybody, and that is about equity. So I
Do you,
think that's why we're under attack now, is there's a misunderstanding.
do you think the main fault lines are between genders, or are they racial, or are they something else? And if you would comment also on sort of the subgroups. So you've got all the different minority groups, if you like. Do people share a common vision of what progress looks like? Are people within these groups actually talking to each other, working, supporting each other, or is there infighting between them? Somebody wants to be more equal than others, even within these groups.
That is such a complicated question. I mean, I would say this. I would say yes to all of that in a lot of ways, because I don't think that we have a common understanding of the work that needs to be done. If we talk about it more around let's harness everybody as opposed to that zero sum language I just talked about, that would help, I think. That would help people embrace the idea. When I talk to executives and I say, we're trying to make sure you use all of your talent, nobody says, you know what? No, we just want to use a small percentage of talent. Nobody says that, because they do want to get the best out of as many of their employees as they can, right? So I think we do have to come to a common understanding of what the work is to be done, that it is about it's about making it better for everybody and making companies better, making the world better. That's number one. Number two, looking at the data, we know that right now there are underrepresented people. And they're underrepresented because they haven't been given a chance, the same chance at getting opportunities in this world, right? Sometimes it's been by law. You weren't allowed to own land if you were a woman, and if you were a person of color, you weren't allowed to get loans. There's all of these institutional barriers that have happened that are factual. Like, these things actually happen. And if we can kind of embrace the fact that in a non-defensive way, that this is the way the world operated at one point, and as a result, people are not in the same situation and need to be accommodated in some way. If you get to the facts around where we are, that there's numbers that show that we're not fair and equitable, I think that's the second thing we need to do. And then the third thing to do is really around sort of, can we agree to approaches that allow us to activate diversity? And so when I work with companies, I was like, how, for example, on mentoring and sponsorship, most of the time, people mentor people that look like them, right? People who they can relate to. Oh, you're just like my son or my daughter. Or I met you because I'm at the same golf club as your dad, right? Like, it's a natural thing that we are in social circles where we meet people like us. There's nothing wrong with that. The issue, though, is that if we want to change the game and include more people in mentorship, in sponsorship, and therefore allow others to move up in our environments, then we need to go outside ourselves and outside our comfort zone. So I always say to people, mentor and sponsor someone that doesn't look like you, because we will automatically do what's comfortable to ourselves. So begin to be purposeful about including people. Notice that there's somebody in the room not speaking. Get to know that person and then begin to activate them in the best way possible, right? That's what happened to me. I wasn't talking in a room, in an important room with a lot of important people, because I was intimidated and I didn't think I belonged. And my boss, after the meeting, she was a white woman, said, "Why did you not say anything in that room?" And I was like, well, I was the lowest person in the room. I didn't think that, like, I wasn't sure of myself. I thought that you all were kind of running the meeting. Like, I had all these preconceived notions in my head around my role and my place. And she said, "I had you in that room for a reason. I brought you into that room because I wanted you to have exposure to those executives and because you knew more than anyone in the room about that subject. And you said not a thing. Don't do that anymore. And it shocked me, but it took her to notice me, to invite me into the room in the first place, and to notice that I wasn't engaging, and to encourage me to come out of my shell and to be who I needed to be, right? That is how we equalize situations. And you can say, well, why didn't she do that to everybody in the room? Well, she did it because she noticed that I, as a woman of color, was feeling marginalized and that I didn't belong and that I needed to feel like I had her support and her encouragement, and she had my back, and I looked nothing like her, and she and I were nothing alike, right? It took that to activate me, right? So again, I think we need to agree to the common purpose. We need to agree to the problem that needs to be solved, and then we need to do those kinds of actions, purposeful actions of inclusion, right? I think those are the things that sort of help us get beyond some of our impasses, because ultimately it's about making connections to people. And for whatever reason, we're not connected to one another. And when we're not connected to one another, we don't listen to one another, we don't care about one another, and we don't want to solve problems together, right? So it is about those human connections and about being people-centric in the work that we do.
So speaking of human connections, you are connected to us in a number of ways besides graduating from what is now Penn State Dickinson Law, but also involved in our ADI initiatives. So tell us both about your initial connection as a student and your current connection.
So my initial connection to the school is that as a young kid growing up in the Harrisburg area and a member of the Korean community, there was a group of um, military personnel who had for whatever reason, had a strong bond to the Korean community. So it was, and a number of these people were Dickinson Law School professors. And so I grew up going to, it was called like a Korean Irish party or get together every year. And it turned out that these were some Dickinson Law professors, and my father and other members of the Korean community were friends with them. And so my connection to law school started when I was a kid, and just really being familiar with the school that way. When it came down to deciding on law schools, I had some very, very hard personal problems that I was dealing with my family. So I needed to be near them. And it made sense for me to go to law school nearby in order to be there for my family. So that's kind of how I got to Dickinson Law School. And during my time there, and I think I spoke at one of the commencements, I talked about the fact that I was pretty much an activist on diversity at the time. Probably not the most popular person in the class because I was very much decrying the lack of minority representation, and talked a lot about racism and sexism, and was kind of a very strong advocate on that front. And it was hard because there weren't many people of color in the faculty, administration, or in the student body. And so our experience in law school, well, my experience in law school was difficult, it was challenging. So from that, I did not spend any time anymore with the school after I graduated. And then there was this dean that showed up at law school named Danielle Conway, who, and she knows this, I've said this before, started to stalk me on LinkedIn. And she was relentless. Like, she was like, I want to talk with you. I'm the new dean. First, I got invited to the welcoming reception for her. I didn't go. Then she contacted me. I kind of blew her off, and she wouldn't give up. So we finally got on a Zoom, and she's like, I'm going to keep stalking you until you agree to re-engage with the school, because this school is a different place than when you were here. And I want to work with you to continue to do this work. And I want you to get back to the community. So after her stalking and her relentlessness, and the fact that I saw she was doing such amazing work, and to be honest with you, just like earth-shattering work in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, I said, you know what, this is something that aligns with my values and with my purpose in life. And okay, I will come back to the school and I will re-engage. And so that's how I got back in contact with the school. And it's a joke kind of, but it's also not a joke, that it really took her tenacity and also looking at the work, the body of work she was doing and hoped to do, that brought me back. So I'm back for what it's
Welcome
worth.
back.
Thank you.
So what does your current engagement look like?
So my current engagement is I'm a part of the book series of the Antiracist Development Institute, and I am one of the systems designers, and I'm also one of the authors of one of the chapters.
And for folks that don't understand the term system designer, what does that mean?
A system designer is somebody who actually goes through a process of ideation around solving a problem or addressing an issue, by engaging in a very broad-based ideation session around what are solutions to the problem at hand, without any regard to whether things can be practically done, without any regard to any barriers. It's really around, seeing the most optimal solution to a very big problem in society. So in this case, it's around how do we dismantle institutional racism, which sounds like an unreachable goal to be able to address, to be able to do, right? But the idea of system design is to put aside all of your preconceived notions and think big. And so what we did as systems designers is to think big and to say, like, if we could design the perfect law school and legal profession and legal practitioner, what would that look like? How would we do that? And from there, we then came up with chapters in a book series that is meant to be a guidebook, meant to be to light the way towards doing that work of dismantling racism. So in a nutshell, that's what we have been doing and we continue to do. And I think when you have that sort of system design mentality, you're able to explore so many more solutions to problems without any restriction, and you can dream big. And I think to make changes, you need to dream big. You need to be able to envision the world the way it should be. It's not just the world that can be. And that's the way a lot of our systems are designed today. It's like, what can be done? What's practical? And then we wonder why we can't solve big problems, because we're not dreaming big enough, because we're not envisioning a world that is so much better and transformational than it is today. So that's not like, you can look up system designing and you could say, Susan, that was like all wrong, but that's the way I saw my job and see my job. And it is very ambitious, but with someone like Danielle, Conway, and the great folks we have involved in this great experiment and project, I think we're making headway, and I think we can do some great things. So I'm very proud to be associated with the Law Schools Initiative.
And that's leadership too, the initiative, but also it sounds like Dean Conway's approach, the way that she did it, the way that she pursued you relentlessly, and sort of turned you around 180 degrees, was in itself a remarkable story of leadership.
Yes, I think that you and the other people at the law school now are doing really great work that I never thought was possible, right? And if I had kept my narrow view of law schools and my law school in place, I would have never been able to dream of the bigger future, right? I mean, we restrict ourselves, don't we? We limit ourselves. We don't try. We won't even try. We give up before we try. And I think that this is an example of the way we can do important work together as a community. And I think that that's what you all are doing at the law school. So I congratulate you on that.
Thank you. And onward and upward, as we say. So let's talk about Lunar New Year. Uh, for
Sure.
the Asian community in the United States was a big deal. They saw the White House acknowledge Lunar New Year. They had lion dance and so on. But you were also involved in Lunar New Year in a different house, the Vice President's residence. So tell us about some of the thoughts that went through your head when you were celebrating Lunar New Year there.
Well, I mean, I think one of the first thoughts that came to me is the fact that it's in these ways that we feel seen, right? When we have our special events, our commemorations, parts of our culture acknowledged in a big way, we are seen. And as an API woman, I have often felt unseen, invisible, and unheard because of the model minority myth, where people don't think we have any problems and we're just so achieving and we're like, we're just killing it and we don't need help from anybody. When the reality is that there's 24 ethnicities in our racial group, and we're the richest and the poorest in the country. The poorest in the country, not among the poorest, but the poorest in some cases. So some of our brethren are really struggling with poverty and deprivation and lack of access and inequity, right? So there's just this lack of information about us, and we're not included in the thought process when people try to think about, like, diversity, equity, inclusion. So to be seen and heard, by the President of the United States, by the Vice President of the United States, was just personally important for me to feel like, oh my gosh, you noticed, you see us, you realize that this is one of the most important holidays that we celebrate. So that was the first thing I felt was that. And the second thing was that, we had a conversation. I had a conversation with the vice president, and a more private conversation among a few of us before the event started, that there's more work to be done. And, we talked about the things that we would like to see the administration think about, address, remember, care for. And so the work is not done yet. That it was good to be acknowledged. It was good to be seen and heard. It's great when people celebrate with us, but there also has to be real action. There has to be the redress of wrongs. There has to be problem solving, and outreach to our community in all ways possible, so that we are going to be able to live the best American life possible, right? So I felt both of those things. And, overall, it was, of course, a great honor to be in the vice president's residence and celebrating with her, for sure. And it was a really momentous event, and I was very proud to be invited.
You. So what does a self-aware leader look like?
So a self-aware leader necessarily needs to begin with understanding ourselves. So what does that mean? It means understanding who we are in terms of our heritage, our upbringing, where we come from, our social identities. It comes from understanding how we show up. Like I said at the beginning of this podcast, that one of the first learnings I had was that I was showing up in one way all the time. So self-awareness is around knowing my heritage, my roots, my background, my lived experience, who I hang out with, and also about, like, how do I actually present myself when I walk into a room? If it begins that way, we have an opportunity as leaders to be really effective and to be impactful in all the work that we do. But we have to know ourselves first, and we have to understand how we show up first. And then we move forward with the work to be done. So that's a self-aware leader.
And you teach that. It's a course. What does it look like when it's a course?
So what it looks like in a course is around that sort of understanding of self, which I think one of the phrases is you have to slow yourself down to speed yourself up. You need to slow yourself down for a minute and to consider the situation at hand and to be aware of yourself and aware of others. And then it's around, how do you create value? How do you create value to the enterprise? How do you solve problems for the enterprise? How do you engage people, employees, around the mission or goal that you're expected to do? It's about value creation. So it starts with that self-awareness that allows you then to see outside yourself and be aware of others, and then to become the leader that can solve the problem at hand or address the goal at hand. So it's really just a bunch of different modules that go from self to others to problem solving and mission driven activities to solutions. So it's actually a program that is virtual and available for those who want to sign up. We're in the middle of a cohort right now, but each year we do engage in that program, and I would encourage everyone to look up. You can look at GallagherLeadership.com, which is the organization that I'm associated with, and read more about the program. But again, it's very important to, I talked about purposeful action. Purposeful action can only come effectively if it's from a position of awareness, right? We don't just slam ourselves through doors like I used to, right? It's around, being smart about the doors and how to get into rooms, right? So that's what being a self-aware leader is all about.
Thank you. So leaders also need to have a downtime. What does downtime look like for you?
Downtime is extremely important, and something that I'm very new at, to be honest. It's like anything else. It's a habit that needs to be cultivated and practice makes perfect. So for me, downtime takes a few different forms. The first is that I'm an avid runner, and it's not just about, oh, I want to be so physically fit and, want to be the peak performance. It's around self-care. Like, I run to meditate and to get away from things and to just be on my own and to have me time. So I've done that for many years, and I've realized that it's helped me kind of get through some of the worst times of my life personally. You know, I've had a lot of tragedy in my family life. I've had a lot of challenges in my professional life, and running has helped me get through it. So that's one form. The other form it takes
Can I just
is,
quickly ask you that? What
yeah,
is it that about running that's cathartic, that helps you to process or helps you to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but take it however you want, and tell us what kind of connections happen when you run that help you get through those situations.
I mean, I think, like, first of all, this sounds completely contradictory, but it is the way I relax, which sounds completely ridiculous because when you're running, how can you be relaxing? As most people, like, people that don't run are like, what? Are you crazy? You're actually physically pounding the pavement. Like, how could that be relaxing? But to run a lot and all the time like I do, you have to learn how to relax your body and let your body move naturally. So I've done a lot of reading on this, but if you ever notice that when you were a kid, or if you have children, they can run all day long. How do they do that? They don't have shin splints. They don't, they don't have like knee problems. And part of it is obviously they're younger, but the way we run when we're kids is a very natural, low impact, gliding type of running style that is what I'm trying to kind of go back to. And there's people like in Mexico and in Africa, there's tribes in Africa where people will run 50 miles a day. In Mexico, they run 50 miles a day because they hunt for their food, and they actually run and catch like deer, and that's how they find their food. And how is it that they can run for 50 miles a day and not get hurt? It's a very light way of running. And so if you run that way, it's very relaxing and it takes a lot of concentration to sort of like let go and be free and to be as relaxed as possible. So for me, running is relaxation. It's about controlling your breath, because when we're stressed, we don't breathe. So taking in more air relaxes our body. And then for me, it's meditative. There's something meditative about relaxing my body, letting myself breathe deeply, and just settling into the run. And all of that is very cathartic to me and very important to my
And do you
well-being.
listen to anything when you run?
I do. I tend to listen to very relaxing music. You know, some people like that really like peppy music that like gets them charged. I actually can't run to that. I have to run to like jazz or Hawaiian music or, you know, just something that's, you know, Native American music, like flute. I mean, like I literally I have to listen to something that's going to slow me down, which sounds contradictory. And so for me, that kind of meditation is important. That's how we need to do meditation, whatever form that takes for us to slow ourselves down and to take care of ourselves. And we need to foster those habits, whether it's 10 minutes a day, an hour a day, I don't care what it is. It's about taking time off to take care of ourselves. And nobody teaches us how to do that. So we have to do it ourselves. We have to do it on purpose and with thoughtfulness, and to create those spaces to get away. I feel really strongly about that. And I'm not good at it yet, but I've been working on it for a little while now. I'm getting better at it.
Thank you. Final question. What advice do you have for a younger version of you?
Well, besides the don't just have one speed, my other advice to others would be the goal is not perfection. That we have to begin to think that what we do is good enough. Oftentimes throughout my career, throughout my life, I've tried to strive to be the perfect person. And perfection isn't possible. So it is chasing a dream that will never happen. And secondly, it's not necessary. The good enough is good enough. That we need to give ourselves space to not be perfect, to do the best we can, and to do it in the way that we can at the moment that is presented to us. So to be kind to ourselves. I think that would be my other advice. Be kind to yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself, and don't be perfect. Don't try to be perfect.
Susan, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Profiles in Leadership. It's been a real pleasure hearing you, learning from you, and uh, look forward to connecting with you in other ways as we move forward.
Thank you so much for having me.